I'm Chelsea Zaccato.
And I'm Natalie Heacock.
And this is Lumber Slingers.
Each podcast, we will be bringing you relevant and useful industry information, including interviews with top lumber professionals and discussion of current events in the industry.
Whether it be lumber grading, industry and market trends, or who's who in lumber, we hope to extend your current tally on industry knowledge. Hi, Nat.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Well, we just wrapped up recording a great episode with Steve Rigdon.
He was the light that we needed in our morning.
He was.
He really, and I think I said this, but I feel like we could talk to him all day. I think definitely want to do a part 2 and dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, he has a lot of knowledge, I will say, about, just everything in our industry where it touches from logging up to the mill level, up to relationships with the tribes and state and federal land and how that all kind of works together. So he definitely is a wealth of knowledge.
And it's so neat when you see someone who all aspects of their life led to his current career. He's in the best place for his expertise and his knowledge level. And it's so cool to see how that ends up.
Yeah, it's like the job was created for him when he needed it. How wild is that? I get the vibe that he just is kind of attracting that into his life, that type of thing. He's very calming spirit and positive. So, yeah, like I said, he he did a little breathing exercise with us before the episode. It was very nice. Just calm down the nervous system. So
yeah, he was great. Well, let me read his bio and then should we get into it?
The episode, yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Steve Rigdon is an enrolled member of the Yakama Nation who grew up on the Yakama Reservation in South Central Washington. His career in forestry and natural resources began as a wildland firefighter in 1991 and has included serving as a forester, manager for Yakama Power, general manager of Yakama Forest Products, and currently as tribal partnership, resource, and stewardship manager at Sustainable Northwest. Guided by tribal leadership and traditional teachings, his work is rooted in a deep connection to land, culture, and spirituality. He advocates for tribal sovereignty under the Yakama Treaty of 1855 through management, co-management, and protection of ancestral lands and resources, while collaborating on restoration projects and reviewing public and private developmental proposals. He is also active in education, serving on university boards and committees, and promotes a balanced way of life integrating work, family, culture, education, and wellness.
Whew, that about sums him up very well.
And that's literally him. I 100% agree with all of those things.
I do too.
All right, shall we?
Let's get into it.
Hello. Today we are here with Steve Rigdon, and we are excited to talk to him and hear his history and what he has to offer us. Hello, Steve, and hello, Chelsea.
Hello. Hi, Steve.
Hello. Glad to be here. Appreciate you guys taking the, time and effort to get me to, share, my perspectives.
We're excited to hear all about him.
Before we knew that Steve was famous because he has his photo at the airport on a wall, we met him last year at the Mass Timber Conference and got to chatting and had a really great conversation. And we're like, we got to have you on the pod. So here we are.
It took us almost a year.
We did it.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, no, one thing, being a tribal member of the Yakama Nation and kind of, the indigenous ways, you're not supposed to be a big braggart. If people see the work that you do and give you recognition for it, you humbly acknowledge it and try not to boast. It's a cultural dynamic thing. I definitely appreciate, being called famous. It's good for my ego.
I know I've walked past you so many times. I love seeing your picture. I don't like that little detour though that you have to take.
Yeah. We're in
terminal.
Terminal E, so it's a little bit off the main courses.
Gotta walk a little bit to see Steve, but he's there.
That detour's almost gone.
Yeah.
I wonder if they'll move your photo somewhere else. All those photos. I like to look at all the photos when I'm walking and seeing where all the wood came from, and it's really
I hope they keep that.
No, they plan to, and they're actually doing another photo collage of about 150 to 200 people that were really involved in the projects with the Portland Airport and all the mass timbers and all coming together. So it's a big representation of the community, and so I get another photo. Well, I'll be up there
Oh.
twice, but it'll be kind of like the, Where's Waldo picture, because
Yeah.
there'll be so many of us. But that, experience was just really cool. The Portland airport continues to lift up the community and the partners,
Yeah.
and, adds a lot more to what we do, with our forests and our industry and manufacturing and livelihoods and way of life. And so it really is something to be proud of.
It really is. I was just there last night and saw somebody's, it was must have been their first time flying since the airport was redone. They were walking right past me and they were like, "My God, they changed all of this. This is incredible." And it's like that
Hmm.
first time you see it, there's nothing like it. It is really special. And like, what a cool thing to have that as part of also your legacy of being in the industry, being involved at that capacity. So that is something that we're all very proud of living in Oregon is when people fly through that airport and see. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I've coined it as our modern day cathedral, because you have this whole just physical, emotional, spiritual experience, especially if you've worked in it and you know all what it takes to pull something like that together from the forest and what the forest has to go through, and the loggers and the mill, and then all the construction workers and the investment from the Port of Portland, and just all the effort. And you don't see that as much, or I haven't seen that, in my experiences. And it just added so much more value and benefit that it really pulls the community together. And it does have a legacy, because as
Mhm.
you know, I'm taking my children and can't wait to take my grandchildren, just to show, like, look, I was a part of this, and this is,
Yeah.
something that was just so meaningful. And we do it all over, we do it all over the world, but this is just one of those gems that captures so much that value and humanity. Yeah, it's a true blessing.
And like you said, that it really made everybody in the industry come together for one project and see parts that you might have not ever seen or known about. And the one thing I never felt about that project was nobody was ever competing for, to have their name on it. It's everybody combined that got to play a little role, whether it was the flooring or putting up, like an interior siding on the wall
Hmm.
or obviously the glulam beams and the CLT. So it's just from end to end, it's just incredible that everybody came together and it's beautiful. So,
One
um,
of the other things that I really cherish from that whole experience is the relationships. Calling a lot of those folks friends now, still interacting, opened up a lot of other opportunities. But that, connection and friendship. And we had them come to the Yakima Reservation, and they toured our forest and our lumber mill, and went to our longhouse and saw, a bigger portion of our way of life. And that was really meaningful to them. And so you're able to share on another level, from just, purchase orders and invoices and
Mhm.
transactions. Now you see the people that are behind the scenes getting it done. And super, super powerful, and actually really good medicine, for the challenging times, because we were in the middle of COVID when a lot of that was happening. And so there are a lot of the doubts and uncertainties and fears that were, impacting the world. And to have such a miraculous, feat accomplished, while that, and bringing it all together, it just, speaks volumes to, people, their abilities, and getting it done.
Yeah,
mhm.
definitely.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome.
before we get too deep in the fun stuff, tell us a little bit about yourself, Steve, and your background and how you got into the forestry industry.
Yeah, no, so I think, sharing that I am a Yakima tribal member, I think being that really kind of spoke to me, as we have our foods and medicines and our fishing and our hunting and our, food gathering, berries and roots. And so ever since I was little, I was part of in the environment. And, it's you're told that you have promises that you have to live up to, and the reciprocities and the relationships and taking care of things and being responsible for them, and how you interact. And so as I was kind of thinking about that as a younger person, it's like, well, what am I going to do with myself? And then when I got out of high school, became a wildland firefighter, had a lot of relatives in that space. And so that elevates it to just maximum heightened, like, degree of protection and responsibility. So while I was there, our tribe, we were doing really well during, the timber wars, if you will, in the 90s. And they took a lot of the profits that they were making off of selling logs, and they invested that into our generation of becoming, foresters, biologists, resource managers. And so I went to school at the University of Washington, and the tribe sponsored me to do that. And then with that, it was definitely felt like it was being paid forward. And so I had, that responsibility, like, okay, I got to go back and I got to, make sure I pay it forward to those future generations. And worked in timber sales, did a ton of logging, worked my way up through the Bureau of Indian Affairs ranks and in forestry. Things weren't quite working out there. And so I made a move to go to Yakima Power, our tribe's public power utility. Went back to grad school in the bioenergy world, trying to develop renewable energy projects, for the Yakima Nation. And again, learned a lot and help the utility expand, but we could never get the whole biomass project off the ground. And we were working with the mill in a cogeneration application with a wood-fired boiler. And so the mill was saw my abilities and started recruiting me to go help them. And so I made the move. I think it was back in 2015 to be the general manager at Yakima Forest Products. And so while I was there, we went through a couple catastrophic fires. It was a big challenge. The markets going up and down. A lot of challenges with getting enough, timber cells in our, production annually. And it was just tough. And for me, it was really tough because we did really well through the early 2000s of getting the mill what they needed. And the government and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they just kept backing off, their, vacancies and not hiring people, budget cuts. And, my brother Phil Rigdon, he's the superintendent of Department of Natural Resources for the Yakama Nation. And one of his coined phrases now is, we were doged before doged even was a thing. You know, Indian countries always just, done more with less. And if you look at the IFMAT report, so the Indian Forest Management Assessment Team report out of Congress every year, they do it every 10 years. We're managing our lands, 20-30% on the dollar. So if you look at the Forest Service, they get a full dollar, to manage their forest, like per acre, but it's more than that, it's hundreds of dollars, but I'm just using as a reference. And we get, 30-35 cents to manage our lands. And we have all the same mandates, all the same, and I actually think we have double and triple standards of permitting and processes, NEPA, because we're not only going through the federal NEPA processes, we have our own, stringent tribal fisheries, culture resources. And the community is a big shareholder. So they're super vested. And when we're doing things either aggressively, like we had a spruce budworm epidemic in the 2000s when I was a forester on the ground, or bark beetle outbreak, or the fires, we get real aggressive and we do a lot of salvage logging to prep it up for the future generations. And people are like, why aren't we doing enough? But then on the flip side, when it's idle times like this and we're just doing, business as usual, we're not getting enough, timber to the mill. And so it's that really tough balancing act. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I was kind of to get like really vulnerable with my life, I went through a divorce and COVID also, and I had a young daughter. And when her mother, she's from California, and so when we split, I made some personal choices that I started looking for jobs that were more remote, because that's the whole COVID space that allow us to work from home and be a lot more flexible. And so I working with Sustainable Northwest, they had a position open up there as the tribal partnership and resource stewardship manager, working with the Forest Service and trying to get more active management on our ancestral lands, and working with the wood markets, more tribal wood sourcing and intertribal timber council. And I really saw that as a huge opportunity to take all the experiences that I've been in, from, fighting fire to being a, forester, working at the utility on energy stuff, and then running the mill and all the wood products, to pull all of those things that my life experiences and professional experiences has groomed me to be that person with Sustainable Northwest and help out more tribes, and but also serve my family dynamics and have the flexibility so I can be with my daughter and go back and forth and see her and create more time and space for her life. And so it's been a great blessing because I've been able to help out a lot more tribes and help out myself, and that work life balance, is really really good for me and my health, and being at the mill and the challenges they were going through. Um, I'm still trying to do the best I can for them, but I'm not tied to the day in day out grind
Right.
and politics and decision making and stresses and layoffs and startups, and running the mill is definitely one of the toughest jobs, the toughest job I've ever had, and pretty rewarding. But at the same time, there are a lot of costs, a lot of personal costs with myself and my family, and so yeah, working for Sustainable
It's
Northwest has been a great thing.
it's serendipitous that you were able to stay involved, from an arm's length almost. So you're not leaving completely, but you found something that uses all your skills and your experience at Sustainable. So that's a pretty cool path to get there. How old is your daughter?
She's 9 years old now.
Oh,
Yep. Yep.
yeah, these are the good times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Spend all that time.
I'm definitely, in about 5 years, I'll probably be like, well, how much more time does she want to spend with me versus her friends in her own world? So this is the sweet moments where we're making memories and doing good things.
Yes.
Yeah, I will say, comes back around. Like in
Yes.
my 20s, I'm like hanging out with my parents was different, but it was fun. It's like now you can go have a beer together, you can go to eat, and talk about adult life. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
comes.
every
And I
season is
do
fun.
I do have two older children too, my daughter Tai and my son Aiden. And so, that does come back around, where we're hunting and we're playing ball together and watching sports with my son, or I'm just hanging out with my daughter and, catching dinner and having adult conversations,
Yeah.
adulting, and watching them adult. And, when they seek my guidance, there's some real just appreciation, that is an opportunity between us to go to some vulnerable spaces and adult and work through the challenges of work and life and budgets and relationships. And so yeah, I'm happy that way.
Good. I hope that my daughter's 10 right now, so similar to you,
Cool.
kind of.
Awesome.
Yeah. So tell us about Sustainable Northwest and what their mission is and what they want to accomplish.
Yeah, so Sustainable Northwest, the mission itself really aligns with the tribal communities. It's, natural solutions for tribes, rural communities, and economies. And so when you look at natural solutions, in our tribal way of life, we're always trying to follow the natural processes that Mother Nature has already set up, and indigenous people have been a big part of that because of our ancestors, using fire and water to really manage a lot of the landscapes that we benefit from the Northwest. And so it was an easy fit for me to get involved and be like, okay, we're going to balance out, industry, economy, manufacturing, mimic those disturbance regimes, that our forests have. And then, the water dynamics and try to, be responsible to communities, around fire and water and renewable energy and ranching, regenerative ranching. And so we're, definitely doing the best we can to do the right thing. And it's not always easy because in traditional economics, the black and white profit margins and things having to pencil out, you have to, convince people in, other restoration projects or other investments that aren't always your normal, economic performa applications. And so that takes a different type of priorities. And so finding those partners and relationships that are willing to go there. And, when we talked about the Portland Airport project earlier, that was it. That was one of the sweetest spots. The Port of Portland, they put a lot of extra money into it, served underserved communities. They were deliberate on who they worked with, being it locally sourced, local community choices. And I think with looking how people are more trying to be more aware, where their food comes from, where their products come from, and how they're responsible to the world and to the environment. Sustainable Northwest is a great fit at getting that done, of finding those projects that balance out, the best we can. There is no free lunch in anything that you do. There's always going to be compromises and impacts, but it's like, what impacts uplift humanity? What impacts, uplift, the environment? And how do we want to pass on these opportunities to the future generations? And it goes hand in hand with our tribal communities. And so, like I said, it was a good way for me to find an organization outside of, the tribe that had our values, the same values of getting that type of
Mhm.
work done. And so I've been just fortunate, to be a part of that team. Great, team members. Our president, Dylan Cruz is so about it, and he works so hard in those spaces. The wood market side with Paul Vandeford, it's been really special because I still can put on my old, Yakima Forest Products hat and, uplifting. We did a wood markets study. Now we're working on, some certification standards. We're working on a directory, trying to match make, tribes with manufacturers, with other off-takes, with architects and construction folks. I work with my direct supervisor, Trent Sager, and we work a lot with, the Forest Service and Washington State DNR and Oregon Department of Forestry, trying to get those active managements to follow the natural processes, as tribal prescriptions have on our ancestral lands. And so we work a lot with the tribes, getting the prescriptions, co-stewardship agreements, Tribal Forest Protection Act agreements. And so much of it's just relationship building. And so it's like coming in, telling your story, showing examples of successes and saying, yeah, how can we replicate it, or how can we do that better, or how can we get the markets? I'm a strong believer, that markets are going to create solutions for what we do, because we can't rely on the government, and it'll get people to, buy into it, literally buy into what we're doing more. And if we're using timber and fiber products more, it helps our environment. I think that's something that, we really have to educate society on, because, as I was, back in college, those economic classes, it's the simple supply and demand. The more you
Mhm.
demand fiber, the more supply, people are going to go out there and make it available. And getting back into, public land stewardship is a huge thing, because with tribes, there's trust responsibilities and tribal rights, especially tied to our first foods that bring it all together. And so for me and our tribe and our tribes, throughout, Indian country, it's very important, because there's a relationship that these organizations, state and federal governments, even local county governments, have a responsibility to work together, um, to uplift, our first foods and our waters and our air sheds and the health of our societies. And it's sometimes it's challenging to talk about it, because, there's a sense of entitlements, if you will, on both
Mm.
sides of the coin. And that's where I go back to, like, it's not a sense of entitlements. Actually, if we take responsibility of it, it's once again paying it forward. We're doing these
Mhm.
things, for our future generations, and we don't want to, create such a situation that it's, they're cleaning up our messes. And I think one thing that we are realizing, especially these last 10, 20 years, is that indigenous people were doing it right for a lot of times out here, and created a lot of the benefits of the water and the forest and the things that we use, with how our ancestors, treated the landscape with fire and water. And now it's like, okay, how do we do that again? And
Mm.
how can we still have, the fiber going to markets, but also have the ecologies, serving the communities and the habitats, and all of the animals and the birds and the insects and the microcosms, because, every little thing counts, every little thing matters, and we can't overlook it. And if we mimic those natural disturbances the best we can, good things will happen. When we get a bit too aggressive, great things don't happen. And if we don't do anything and we let it run its course, then bad things happen. And people always say, "Well, let just Mother Nature do its thing." And it's like, Mother Nature's out of whack. We took, the the practitioners and the stewards out of the landscape, not on purpose back in the day with human or with our, tribal communities contacting the Euro Americans because we lost so much, human capital. I don't know if you're aware that during the late 1700s and early it's up into the it's over 90 some percent of our, indigenous populations were lost, throughout the Americas.
Wow.
And so that's a lot of stewards and practitioners that were out there deliberately putting fire onto the landscape,
Mm.
deliberately trapping beavers and working the floodplains and the hydrologies. And so when you have that many practitioners get out of the system, it gets out of, its natural processes really quick because we came up and we helped develop these natural processes, since the ice age.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so it's trying to again balance that back out. We're not going to be able to do everything that we want everywhere we want, but where it makes sense, to have the industrial type of forests, yep, go there, do that. Where it's restoration works on meadows for foods and medicines and water, yep, do that. And so the way I look at it, especially as renewable energy projects are similar, to just those type of impacts. It's like, read what your backyard is telling you and create a relationship with it so that it's balanced out. You're not taking too much, you're not leaving too much, and you're doing it right. And then that's one of our big philosophies, in our tribal community is always, don't take more than what you need. And
Mhm.
that gets really tough in an American economic model. And so we know that, you got to plan for those tough days, especially being a commodity world with the timber industry. And then so it's like, okay, when it's time to make money, let's make some money. And when it's time to, hunker down and grind it out, but still keeping all the workforce going, keeping all the manufacturing it's going, keeping all the markets going, we got to do that too. And we have to convince, society and get the social license that what we're doing is a huge benefit. And we have to figure out ways to monetize, those environmental benefits. And I think we provide, so much clean air and water and environment and recreation, to society, but we're having a difficult time, monetizing it. And so we're just getting paid, black and white cents, for the timber product. But if you look at the whole systems that it contributes, to society, the value is, 10, 20 times fold. It's way more than your typical traditional models. And so, Sustainable Northwest sees all that, tries to do that. We have a bunch of successes. We've built a ton of relationships, and I'm grateful just to, have a voice and have a voice with you. It's interesting because I look at, my predecessors and they didn't have these opportunities, to sit on podcasts, to get their pictures up at the airport, to go to all these, wonderful places and share what we do. They've just been doing what we do.
Grinding.
Yep. Yep. And so, it's, if
Can
we
I
can,
have you can I have you back up? You said social license. And so I
Mhm.
want to understand what does that mean in the context of what we're talking about or to tribal forestry?
Well, I was probably talking more on the timber industry itself. And so the social license is people trusting us. I think we have to, I think back in the days when you had like Ranger Rick and Smokey the Bear and different things where, forestry, the timber industry, loggers, lumbermen, they were revered. There were people that really wanted to be that, do that. There were tons of million infrastructures and markets, all over the place. And with the timber wars and, conservation groups, preservation groups, environmentalists, they've stigmatized, who we are and what we do. And it took away our social license. And that's to do what we do. And so the social license is acceptance. And so it's
Mhm.
about accepting who we are, our ways of life, the traditions and cultures that go along with it, that manage our forests. And so when you look at tribal communities, we've been managing our forests for millennia, for thousands and thousands of years. We're utilitarians. We
Mhm.
use things from the lands that benefit us. And then we also reinvest back into those landscapes and we don't walk away from it. And so it's about having that type of relationship so that society believes and trusts us to know that we're going to do the best we can, and if we do make mistakes, we're going to clean up our mistakes, and we're not just going to leave it for somebody else. And so I think with that social license of trust and acceptance would just be a lot stronger, and people would actually buy into our markets and build up more mass timbers. They'd build with, housing, and they'd also their energy choices, giving biomass a fair shake, because if you look at solar and wind or nuclear and hydro, fossil fuels, they're all subsidized, and biomass has never been given a fair shake in those opportunities. But yet we contribute into all aspects of clean water, better environments, habitat, and air. And with the pulp industry, having moving out of our region, we have to find more markets to build up the ability to manage some of those lower value materials.
Do you think, or have you experienced where private landowners or even state, do they try to learn from what you have done as a tribe or different tribes have done? Is there that peer-to-peer type of conversation happening?
Yes, I would probably say one of the best examples is Port Blakely and how they're really trying to manage their lands for longer term rotations and getting bigger trees, one for mass timbers, to have to fit that market, but also they see the ecological benefits. And so if you extend your rotation an extra, 20 years, the ecological benefit is just so much better. I don't know the percentage points on it, but I would definitely say it's probably 50 to 75%, if not 100% better from, 40-year-old forest to a 60 to an 80-year forest. And
Mm.
so it comes down to the landowner's bottom line. And so I think if landowners that want to pass on, generational wealth beyond the form of the dollar, but into habitat, into values, in traditions and culture, that generation wealth, you have longer rotations, and those longer rotations create all those other benefits. And it gets tough because there's life choices and taxes and things you have to pay when you're when the I can't, inheritance taxes and things like that. And so I think the systems need to be thought through better so that, if people are trying to pass on that generational wealth in the form of ecology and habitats and other, benefits to society, they should be rewarded for it, not penalized for it.
Right.
And and the states are definitely talking to us a lot more. Academia, and I gotta give credit to the universities because they're doing a lot more research and they're advocating, to work with the tribes. And so by their those relationships and advocacies, the states and the Forest Service and the BLMs and BORs and all the other entities are listening. Because I think if it was, just a tribal community coming in and advocating, saying, hey, do it the way we do it, I don't think it would land in the same essence. And I will also say tribes are still apprehensive. They're not opening up and trying to welcome anybody and everybody onto their lands to show, what they do because
Mm-hmm.
fear of exploitations, fear of, philosophical, ideological differences, people
Mhm.
telling us, you got to manage it this way or you got to do it that way. And there's always the fine print. And we, to have our sovereignties, autonomies, we want to do it our way, but we still have to go through the Bureau of Indian Affairs hoops. There's just a bunch of standards and CFRs and protocols that we have to abide by, plus our own tribal community standards. And so we're already,
Right.
I believe, way above any typical, certification or third party standards, but yet we get questioned. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
why can't people just believe us? Why can't, they trust us? And why do we have to go through these processes of audits and proving it? And so we do have to open up, to those audits and proving it and showcasing it, but we're careful. We're cautious on how we do that. Last year, we had a wonderful opportunity to bring out, the Yale University dialogue, and they, with, foresters and resource managers from around the country and around the world, they toured, the Northwest, and the Yakima Reservation was one of their stops. And it was one
Wow.
of the first times that they did this in the United States, because they're usually doing it around the world in other countries, Indonesia, Brazil, South America, places like that, and really try to deal with some of the environmental and humanity, issues that those countries struggle with. Because I mean, for we do we've been doing it right. We've been doing it right for a long time up here. So it's kind of like, well, do we want to go, really see, where it's done. The systems are in place. But one thing that is happening, especially with mills shutting down, pulp mills shutting down. It's like, wait, our challenges are here at home now because how do we maintain, our forests and environments and our watersheds and our air sheds and all the, fire issues, catastrophic fires and the rest of it without having infrastructure, workforce and markets to get it done. And so they're like, we need to, again, look in our backyard to make sure that we have the opportunities to keep doing it right.
Yeah.
So, let's just take the airport project for example. How does Sustainable Northwest get involved in that? Does the airport come to you and say, "Can you help us?" Or that usually how it goes?
Yeah, yeah. And so the Port of Portland came to Sustainable Northwest and they said, "Can you help us pull together, all of the local landowners and mills and create a local product, for the airport?" So, Paul Vanford, he's been with Sustainable Northwest for years and had a really good track record of working, with mills because we were, developed out of the timber wars. And so during the timber wars in the 90s, we saw that a lot of public lands were, being limited on their access. A lot of mills were going away. And back then, our founder was like, this is not going to work. This is not sustainable. We need to keep infrastructure. We need to keep workforce. We need to keep, these markets in place to keep our forests working. And so we had a lot of those relationships in place. And so when they wanted to do a regional project and, bring in over 3 million board feet of product into, a massive, building and infrastructure, Sustainable Northwest already had a good reputation, already had, a lot of the network and said, okay, they're a good hub. And that's what we are. We connect people, we connect projects, we connect partners. And they reached out to, Yakima Forest Products. And I had no idea where my journey was going at that time because, I was just running the mill. Again, it was middle of COVID. And they looked at us and they said, "Do you guys have, the lamp stock product where we could do these laminated beams? Are you willing to be a part of it? But we also want to, do some videos, have some interviews, podcasts, things like that. You're going to, have to commit to a lot of, that type of work." I saw it as, free publicity, being running the mill. So I was like, well, yeah, sure. We'll go do it and, get the publicity and be a part of the story. And it's transformed my life. I'm working for the, Sustainable Northwest now. I'm helping out this many more tribes. We're working on big policy issues, big marketing issues, certifications, trying to create access. And in a perfect world, I would see tribes being these hubs, these hubs working with our private landowners and with the state and the Forest Service, putting more, tribal prescriptions into the landscape, creating markets, getting that, helping get that social license, getting that acceptance and trust and buy-in and saying, look, we've been doing it for thousands of years. Here's our partners that we're working with. We're all trying to get this done to keep this, economy, tradition, core values, and way of life going. Because if we don't, we're going to have to deal with it, with fires and floods and wind events and everything else. And we're going to be, paying as taxpayers to deal with it instead of paying as, consumers, jobs, industry of getting it done. And
Hmm.
it just fits. It fits within our, ideologies. And so
This
that's
might
what
be a
happened.
sorry.
No,
Cut you
go ahead.
off.
No,
I
that's
this
what
might
happened with the Portland airport. They just pulled it all together and got it done.
Wow, very big project to pull together all these types of places.
Right.
My
Right.
outside looking in, somebody who's sells lumber, processes it. How do companies work with tribal? Like are you guys milling all your own lumber on the tribal land, or are you guys selling logs to lumber companies and working with them in a partnership? Like what does that look like if, to I guess bridge the gap between the two, right? So
Yep.
there's more collaboration.
So it's both. And so if it's a mill like Makah or Hoopa or Yakima, Yakima's, just a lot bigger than those other tribes, you have access to lumber. So you call them up, you look at what products they have, see if they fit the projects, and then you go from there. There's also Menominee, back in Wisconsin. And so then there's also another big tribal lumber mill in Canada. But if they don't have the manufacturing capacity, then it's about, getting a hold of their, resource managers, their foresters, and seeing what logs they have available and who they're selling their logs to. And if you want it to be a tribally sourced project, it's like, okay, who do you sell your logs to? Is it Hampton? Is it Vaughan Brothers? Is it Sierra Pacific, Boise Cascade? And then see if they'll work with you to create, a tribally sourced project. At Sustainable Northwest, we've definitely been a connector of those projects more. So we're out there trying to lift up these spaces and find the projects and work with the tribes to pull those down. It's getting real interesting now too, because we're working even with, musical instruments, furniture, and those are just small scale, but at the same time, the audiences that they reach and just showing that, we're doing responsible things in our forests and environment has a lot of value on the marketing side and getting that trust and acceptance. And so one of our projects at Sustainable Northwest is to create the directory so that if people are trying to figure out who the players are, who the mills are, who the tribes are, and what products can come from it, we're going to have like a Google map or some kind of map, GIS application where you can get on the map. You can look in the region, you can see the tribe, and you can, work with those people that are listed on there to capture the story. Because I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
biggest part of this whole, equation is like, how do we capture the story to
Yeah.
uplift, those synergies, those energies, and the positivity. And so we've been working on that for years, and now you're getting really close to having some tangible tools to go there.
That's a cool resource. I mean, I
Mhm.
feel like even with the airport project, that's what I heard a lot of, and I know that that's what the Port of Portland really wanted was where did this log, where did this piece come from? Which log, which plot of land? And
Hmm.
so that having that tool or resource, I mean, that's a big feat for you guys to have that completed.
Yeah, yeah.
That'll
And
be cool to
so
look at. That can be available to the public to see that like on your website or
for sure, and we're gonna have conversations with Intertribal Timber Council on where it is hosted. Is Sustainable Northwest going to host it? Will Intertribal Timber Council host it? Will some other third party? But once we do deploy it, yeah, we'll run it through all the networks and make it available and probably showcase it at Mass Timbers Conference.
Mhm.
The year that we're want to put it out there because a lot of people ask and right now it's pretty much you have to find the relationships you have to do we call it the fishing or hunting different aspects where you're throwing out some lines and you hope you catch something or if you know somebody that knows somebody you connect with them and so even from here with this podcast and reaching out to those markets reach out to Sustainable Northwest and if you're interested in tribally sourced wood that's a space that we're working in and it doesn't even have to be tribally spaced wood it's just doing the right projects, catching the stories, working with the right people because I think we all have to come together, private, tribal, state, federal, industry because we've lost so much of our industry and the tools that we're going to continue to manage our forests with and it's going to set us back if we don't come together and do something
Mhm.
better because we have to convince the people with the money, be it investors, corporations, and the feds and the state, to keep this going because it's not a matter if we're going to be impacted, by the bugs and the insects and the storms and the fires. It's just a matter of when and what
Right.
is that cost going to be, to society. And again, if we create markets for it, that's just way better than reacting, to it and having to
right,
do all these disaster fund cleanup stuff.
right.
Yeah.
Outside of all that, so we've got a lot stacked against us, obviously, in the industry, like you were just saying. So, what's one? You're very optimistic. You did a breathing exercise with Natalie and I before we started the episode. You're very zen. So, maybe to end the episode, what's something right now that's gives you hope for the future in the industry? What's a positive light that you're seeing?
I think it is that determination of humanity. I think if you look at the example that the Port of Portland did during COVID and created such a miraculous thing, facing such dire situations. And so we need to convince the future generations that as doom and gloom as it may look, with affordable jobs and affordable housing and the rest of it, that the industries and the environmental work that we're doing really complements a better way of life. And so we need to convince them to be a part of it and to contribute to it and to pay it forward, that they have a responsibility to themselves and those future generations, and out of respect of all of our elders and ancestors that did it before us, to continue on and to face those challenges instead of walking away from them. Find that ambition, endurance, and strength, and put in the work, because it's going to be work no matter what, and it's the work that we choose to do in the best ways possible. So totally encourage the ones of us that are doing it to reach out and recruit and build up those ones that are going to take our place.
Gosh, I
Absolutely.
feel like I could just talk to you all day. How did this go by so fast?
It did.
Yeah.
Just keep
Thank you
talking.
so much. We really appreciate you being on here and sharing your wisdom with us, and just really refreshing. So thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank
thank you,
you.
Steve.
You guys have a wonderful day, and I look forward to us catching up again.
Thank you.
Absolutely.